USA September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. On September 11, 2001, a group of assailants boarded 4 domestic flights at 3 East Coast airports and disabled the crews shortly after takeoff, with some of the pilots possibly stabbed with box cutters disguised by the hijackers. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 was piloted into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City after flying from Boston. The South Tower was hit 17 minutes later by United Airlines Flight 175, which had taken out from Boston. The Federal Aviation Administration issued a nationwide ground stop minutes later, and the 4th plane, United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark, New Jersey, crashed an hour later, at 10:03 a.m., near Shanksville in the Pennsylvania countryside, after its passengers attempted to overpower their assailants after being informed of the events via cellular phone. The World Trade Center's heavily damaged South Tower fell at 9:59 a.m., followed by the North Tower 29 minutes later. After racing to the scene and into the buildings, more than 400 police officers and firefighters died in New York City. On September 11, President George W. Bush was visiting a second-grade classroom in Sarasota, Florida, when he learned that a plane had slammed into the World Trade Center. Bush visited Ground Zero, the smoldering rubble of the World Trade Center and the hundreds of individuals who died there, on September 14. Bush's steadfast response to the attacks lifted his support ratings from 55% before September 11 to 90% in the days thereafter, the best for a president ever. Unlike the relatively isolated site of the 1941 Pearl Harbor attack, which the September 11 events were rapidly compared to, the World Trade Center was located in the heart of one of the world's biggest cities. Hundreds of thousands of people witnessed the attacks firsthand, many bystanders recorded or videotaped the events, and millions more watched the tragedy unfold on TV. The footage of the attacks, as well as scenes of throngs of people gathered at Ground Zero as the site where the towers once stood came to be known, were replayed in the media countless times in the days following September 11, as were scenes of throngs of people gathered at Ground Zero as the site where the towers once stood came to be known were replayed in the media countless times in the days following September 11, as were scenes of New York markets were forced to close for 4 trading days due to damage to Lower Manhattan's infrastructure and fears of stock market panic. Al-Qaeda scored a huge tactical victory with the September 11 attacks. The strikes were well coordinated and impacted many places deep into the enemy's heartland, and they were amplified by being broadcast to an audience of untold millions throughout the world. The propaganda of the deed on September 11 occurred in the world's media capital, ensuring that the catastrophe received the most widespread coverage possible. If Al-Qaeda was a relatively unknown organization prior to September 11, it quickly became well known in the days after the attacks. Most governments were immediately persuaded by the evidence gathered by the US that the attacks were carried out by the Islamic militant group Al-Qaeda. Meanwhile, security measures have been dramatically reinforced in the United States, particularly at airports, government buildings, and athletic events. The September 11 attacks were a strategic failure for Al-Qaeda, notwithstanding their success in wreaking massive havoc and death. Later, some in al-leadership Qaedas attempted to portray the Western intervention in Afghanistan as a triumph for Al-Qaeda, including individuals who had initially opposed the assaults, such as Egyptian Saif al-Adel. In the weeks running up to September 11, however, there is no evidence that al-Top Qaeda's leaders made any planning for an American invasion of Afghanistan. Toppling the Taliban was thus hardly an American mistake. It was the first and only dictatorship in the modern Muslim world to rule according to al-beliefs, Qaeda's, and it came with the loss of an entire country that Al-Qaeda had previously utilized as a safe haven. Al-Qaeda was unable to restore anything approximating its prior status as a terrorist organization with major clout in Afghanistan following the Taliban's defeat. In November, just 2 months after the September 11 attacks, the Northern Alliance and the US destroyed the Taliban. The jail eventually housed about 800 detainees, though by the 10th anniversary of the September 11 attacks, the number had been reduced to less than 175 inmates. In his State of the Union speech on January 29, 2002, President Bush detailed a new preemptive war plan that went well beyond the long-held belief that the US would go to war to prevent an adversary from launching an attack that presented an immediate threat to the country. The United States of America will not let the world's most dangerous regimes threaten us with the world's most destructive weapons. Bush identified those dangerous regimes as an axis of evil that included Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. We investigated the transnational terrorist network that could be behind the next attack on the United States after September 11. Despite the lack of evidence that Saddam Hussein's Iraqi government collaborated with Al-Qaeda in the September 11 attacks, The U.S. prepared for war against Iraq as part of its larger global anti-terror campaign. On the eve of the invasion of Iraq, President George W. Bush issued the following order.